I'm joined now by Mark Selby, incoming CEO of Canada Nickel Company. Mark, welcome back.
Thanks, James. Great to see you again.
Yeah, Mark, Canada Nickel Company is self-explanatory.
Yep.
It's basically been formed as a result of a discovery in Ontario. Tell me about this discovery.
Yeah, I mean, I've been around nickel for 20 years. I was at Inco early on in my career, and then the last 10 years with RNC, where we successfully developed the Dumont project. In nickel, there's actually very, very few real new discoveries. And this discovery that we made, there's 4 holes in, it's early days, but because of what we know at Dumont, the geophysics basically gives you a pretty good sense of how big it could be, and the anomaly that's there is bigger than what we had at Dumont. Mm-hmm. And so, I'm encouraged by the mineralogy we've seen, the geology we've seen, and the nice thing about the project is, unlike a lot of other nickel projects that are, could be remote, relatively small scale, this is just outside Timmins. You literally drive past the Kidd Creek mine, and another 10 kilometers past that is where this deposit's sitting right underneath the highway. So you've got all the major infrastructure in place. And, because of the recipe that we've got from the work we've done at Dumont, we'll be able to advance this project pretty quickly. So.
Right. So the grades of the drilling that's occurred so far on this property are pretty impressive, though a non-mining person might think, well, that's low grade, 0.25 to 0.28% nickel, but over 500 meters, there's probably some high grade in there. So how do the economics of that play out?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things with Dumont is we're able to demonstrate, that these large low-grade nickel deposits are just like, large low-grade copper deposits. So, for investors who are used to looking at big copper deposits, these are analogous to that. So, nickel prices are 2 to 3x what a copper price is. So, a good copper deposit would be 0.5 or 0.6%. So, 0.25 to 0.33 translates pretty nicely into those type of grades, for a copper deposit. So, and again, most of the big copper deposits today are, way up in the remote part of the Andes. So to find something of that scale sitting literally underneath the highway, 15 kilometers outside of Timmins is a tremendous, I mean, again, that's why hopefully my excitement about this opportunity is coming across.
Yeah, no kidding. Okay, so the conventional wisdom suggests that we need $20,000 per ton nickel in order to put a new mine into production. But those are looking at traditional, large-scale, bulk tonnage, low-grade mines. And so is this also going to require $20,000 per ton nickel to put into production?
Yeah, no, I think if you go into more remote locations or, into laterite projects, which have a lot more capital intensity that's required, again, the Dumont feasibility study, was economic at $7.75 a pound. So it's $17,000 a ton. And today we're sitting just under $18,000 a ton. So, again, extremely early days for Crawford, but, again, if we're able to prove up to something that looks like Dumont and potentially better than Dumont, then, we can, you could deliver it at today's nickel prices.
Wow, great. Okay, so let's talk a bit about the price of nickel. So we're looking at a graph on my NDI of the historical price graph of nickel for the last year. And it has gone up from $12,400 US dollars per ton to where it sits today at $17,000 per ton, an increase of like 30-40%. How likely is that price trend to continue?
Yeah, no, I mean, one of the things that's exciting about nickel is that every 15 to 20 years, we go through a real super cycle in terms of prices. So, in the late 60s, nickel got to $18,000 a ton in 1968 dollar terms. So that's, probably $100,000 a ton today. In the late 80s, we went through another massive boom in nickel prices that got up to $9 or $10, $22,000 a ton at that time. And then, obviously, people around in the mid 2000s, we saw the one where we went from, $4,000 a ton to $54,000 a ton. Now, it doesn't happen in a straight line. In fact, I think nickel prices are going to roll over a little bit, before year end. But, fundamentally, the EV market is going to need 1 million tons by 2030. That's sort of the midpoint of most people's forecasts. The other part about nickel, because I think most investors, you haven't had really a lot of ways to invest in it recently, it's a very high demand growth metal. So underlying demand growth has been 4 or 5% a year. That we have to find another 1 million tons to satisfy the base demand from the current uses. So in 10 years, we need to find 2 million tons of nickel.
And how many tons are coming into production in the next 10 years?
Right now there should be another 500,000 plus coming from Indonesia, which will double production from Indonesia.
But Indonesia is about to stop exporting.
Exporting ore, and then people are going to build plants in Indonesia to transform it in country. But the reality is there's nowhere near that number of projects, on the books today to be able to deliver that amount of nickel. So, and the other part about the structure of the nickel industry is Indonesia's been the bulk of the growth for the last 10 years. And so what's happened is, they've become the dominant source of supply. And Robert Friedland at the BMO conference last year talked about nickel being the new gasoline, because really in terms of the battery, that's going to be the primary metal by weight in an EV car. And so Indonesia will end up representing more of the nickel market than Saudi Arabia did of the oil market at its peak. If you add in the Philippines and then take New Caledonia, they control that. Those three countries will control more of the nickel market than OPEC did of the oil market in the early 70s. So, you've got three countries that are cash constrained with a critical mineral. The temptation to throw on export duties and so forth on top of it, is going to be pretty great. So, owning nickel assets outside of those three countries, I think, investing in oil in 1971 was a pretty good trade.
Right.
I think getting into nickel today, for multiple reasons, is going to be one of those great once in a decade trades.
Yeah, you bet. So Tesla must be very interested in what's happening with this particular deposit, in that it's so close to their battery factory in Nevada.
I can't speak yet with Tesla on that one, but I've been involved with discussions, with other car companies,
Tesla
with
did
regard
make
to
mention of that.
with regard to nickel properties outside of Indonesia, and they're a car company doesn't want to have their supply chain tied to a developing country that has turned their minds on and off several times, like Indonesia. So I think. Again, the great attraction with this, particular deposit is, it's one of the only new projects that can deliver, big quantities has the potential to be a big nickel deposit in a low-risk jurisdiction that would be very attractive to those companies.
At a conference in May, Tesla managers spoke of the importance of continued investment in the mining of battery metals, particularly nickel. And Tesla has, in fact, reduced its cobalt content and increased its nickel content, and intends to replace cobalt completely with nickel.
Yes.
So that, to me, signifies a huge uptake. Battery metals, or the battery industry, is currently 3% of the global demand for nickel, and it's expected to increase to 12%. So that's part of your 2 million tons that is needed.
Yeah, no, exactly. So, as we sell more EVs, and every EV, again, with Tesla, everyone's trying to figure out how to jam more nickel in and less cobalt. It just brings down the price and it increases the energy density. So, which means it can drive farther.
So how soon until this deposit could go into production?
Oh, again, it's early days here. But, in terms of being able to advance it rapidly, we've got the recipe from Dumont.
Right.
We know exactly with geophysics, sort of where the better parts of the deposit are. That took, 7 years and $100 million to figure that out, but we now fully understand that. So, with what we've got there, we can, we'll finish the first phase of concept drilling, and the financing we have now will allow us to sort of get through that first phase. And then, if is there what we think is there, then we'll move into, rapidly drilling out the resource, getting, pre-feasibility study done, and then trying to push it forward, as fast as possible. Because I can tell you in our discussions at RNC with the various automakers, their questions for Dumont were, it was, when can you double it again? Can you double it twice? Again, in terms of just, crazy questions. The thing is, again, for people who are sitting back, you see literally the industry is investing tens of billions of dollars in battery plants. They're building tens of billions of dollars in precursor plants that make the stuff that goes into the batteries.
Yes.
It's just a matter of time, and the industry is going to need to spend a lot of money to provide the mine supply that's got to feed those precursor plants to feed the batteries. So, they're not quite banging down the door yet, but they will be, sooner than later.
You bet. Okay, so Canada Nickel was formed out of some sort of creative sort of company jigging.
Yeah.
So when does Canada Nickel itself, when can investors buy Canada Nickel as a publicly traded company?
Sure. So, again, advancing early stage projects in this market's been tricky. So these guys, found a way to get the project to where it is. The nice thing about the deposit, about Canada Nickel, is it's going to be a nice clean new company, 50 million shares outstanding. We're going to be dividending it out of Noble. Both Noble and Spruce Ridge will have shares in Canada Nickel. So between now and the end of the year, investors can buy either of those stocks, and some of those shares will be dividended out of those companies, and then we'll be looking to go public, as soon as possible, targeting somewhere around the end of November, first half of December.
Mm-hmm. All right, Mark, that's a great update. I'm excited about nickel now again, thanks to you for the third time in my life.
Yep.
So let's hope that it works out as well as it has the last few times, and we'll have you back as soon as there's more to talk about. Thanks for joining me today.
Sure, that's great, and we'll have some very steady news flow over the next year. So look
Great.
back to talking many times.
Awesome.
Thanks.